Hello, I'm Simon Hedley, and welcome to this episode of Pause, Stop, Reset. Today, my guest is someone I have the greatest respect for, and that's my friend Terry Stout. He's someone that really cares about people and is a true student of life. His works encompass time as a psychotherapist, as well as a Navy and then airline pilot. He is really passionate about giving people the tools they need for grief recovery, not just grief counselling. And beyond that, he has this really rich, unique skill set and perspective on life, and I'm very grateful to have him join us today. So Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simon. It's wonderful to be with you today.
I'm glad to have you with us. And I gave you a slight introduction, but you've had a really rich life. People that don't know you, Terry, haven't kept up with what you're up to now. Who are you and what are you focused on?
Okay, first of all, thank you for asking me who I am rather than what it is I do, because that's more important to me. What I guess the answer to that would be that what resonates most with me among all the labels and titles and any of those kinds of things is chakaruna. Chakaruna is a bridger, and I like to think of myself as being a bridger for many different things. My focus these days is to be of service to people by helping bringing them home to their true self. And I do that through my private practice as a psychotherapist, a hypnotherapist, a grief recovery specialist, a spiritual advisor, and as well as through the workshops that I do.
Beautiful. I haven't heard that word before, that bridger word. And it's a really interesting one.
Yes. So it's often referring to people bridging between the worlds. We tend to be stuck into this very physical world, but there's a spiritual world out there as well. And it's always present and it's always accessible. And so it's bridging between those worlds. It's also bridging between people's past griefs, their subconscious programming, how to connect the dots so that they can move through the process to come home to themselves.
Yeah. And I worked with you last year. It's how we got to know each other. And this aspect of coming home to our true selves, really interesting. And I hope we touch on that a bit more as we go through the show today. I like to start, we'll get a sense of who you are by sort of looking at the shifts and resets you've been through. I know you fairly well, but what would you say were the biggest shifts and resets you've been through in your life up to now?
Well, if you went chronologically, I think there were a few. When I was an undergraduate in college studying psychology, it was the time of the Vietnam War. My draft number was 52, and the first dead body I ever saw was a friend of mine who came back 6 months after going to Vietnam in a pine box. It was a wake-up call for me. And I knew I didn't want to do that. And so I listened to my father and joined a reserve officer program. When I graduated, I was commissioned and sent back to Navy flight training. That was the introduction to my life as a pilot. And I deliberately chose a trajectory that would keep me in multi-engine airplanes off carrier decks and as far away from combat as I could. The result was I fell in love with flying. When I left the military, I pursued an airline career. I got hired. I was on top of the world, flying international trips. And then Ronald Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers. And so the airlines laid off thousands of pilots and flight attendants, and I was one of them. And rather than chasing jobs, I made a choice. I made the choice to go back to my first love and enroll in a master's program in counseling. And then in that, there was another choice I made, and that was for my second year's internship. I chose to work with people that had life-threatening illnesses. I actually created an internship that wasn't offered. I talked them into it, proud of that. And that was significant for me because the people who were dying didn't have time for traditional counseling, which was like watching paint dry, and they didn't have time for the bullshit. So they cut straight to the chase. And because of that, I took on hypnotherapy. And I considered those people who were life-threatened to be my greatest teachers. Not that I didn't have good professors, I did, but the people who were life-threatened were much more awake to what was real. Then I got recalled to flying international trips on 747s. That provided me with the income I needed, doing a job that I absolutely loved. And it gave me the freedom to do my private practice without seeing people as accounts receivable. And then, of course, there's my daughter's death. That was significant too.
Thank you, Terry. I know your daughter's death was a linchpin moment or a turning point. Maybe we'll touch on that later. But I also get that you've had this very grounded reality to death with the Vietnam War, with those things, with your friend coming back, that most of us today thankfully haven't had to engage with in that way. And yeah, definitely a lot of turning points in your life that bring us in, and much more, I'm sure, as well. Keeping it light for a second, I talk about these three aspects of pausing, stopping, and resetting. I'm curious which of those you find hardest. Do you find it easier or harder to pause, to stop, or reset? And why do you think that is?
Well, I think that resetting is the biggest challenge. You can stop, you can take a breath, you can pause, You can stop what you're doing, but the resetting is not quite so easy. And it's because we always carry our past. Our past is always in front of us, and we tend to see our past and through the interpretation of subconscious programming and unresolved griefs that are still there. And because of the stories that we have about all of that, it's hard for us to clear that out and step aside from it and see things as they really are in the present moment. Because we live in a world that presents a collective consciousness that in substance tells us to be outer referenced, which keeps us from looking within, then it's hard for us to get to our true self and find the answers from there. So it took me a long time to learn how to be inner referenced, to not be the victim of circumstances, to be instead the recipient of something that may be painful, but it doesn't define me and who I am. And it took me a long time to come to the realization that I always had a choice regarding my relationship to whatever events are external circumstances, which is really the choice to reset. So I think the resetting is significant, and I call it meekweeing, being able to transform something into fertile soil from which new things can grow. And because of our upbringing, that's not always easy.
No, it definitely isn't. And I love that you brought up that meekwe process. Often I found in our conversation is sort of a different flavor to the ideas that may sound similar, but a very different perspective. And I know even with time, you have quite a unique, different viewpoint at times, sort of circular time, not linear time. But I'm going to ask you the question we normally ask, which is, if you could give a lesson to your younger self, what would that lesson be and why?
To my younger self, I think that honestly, there's a part of me that's always known this, but it took a while to be able to articulate it. And for my younger self, I would say be anchored in your true self and live in it. No pretenses, no hiding, no being outer reference, just be your true self. It's not about what you do, it's who you are. Be fully present, and I would say present in your presence. That you're not a victim of circumstances, and stay connected through your heart so that spark of light that's in the middle of the heart connects you with your higher self, your oversoul, your true self, whatever you choose to call it, and seek your answers from there because your truest authority is within you.
I love it. And we were talking about the Callan episode. You and Callan have there's something about an inner belief, an inner faith that I think you have, an inner understanding about the nature of things, which isn't one I grew up around very much. I really relish and I find interesting. More than interesting, I think it's really valuable. I'm curious if any books and movies have helped you come to that realization. Any books and movies that have helped you acquire this perspective you have?
There's a few books that come to mind immediately for me. More recent, I guess. One book that I always suggest that people get is called The Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo. That's actually my bathroom read in the morning. That's a series of thought or a meditation for each day. It can be either one paragraph or a full page, but it's always deep and heartfelt and meaningful. It really takes you to a much deeper level, and it's a good way to start off the day. So I highly recommend that book. And then there's Michael Singer's books. He wrote The Untethered Soul, which is all about the mind and its workings and its trappings. Then he wrote a prequel to that called The Surrender Experiment. But I think more than that, from that, he's done a webinar that's on Sounds True about surrender. And that's surrender not in the terms of giving up, but of giving over. And then another most recent book for me was The Bowl of Light by Hank Wesselman. And that's really meant a lot to me because it seems to be a synthesis of all of the things I've come to know to be true throughout my life experiences. Movies, Spontaneous Evolution by Bruce Lipton. The movie Arrival, which is a movie about circular time. And it's really, you can't get it by watching it the first time. You have to watch it many times. And the reason is because we are conditioned to believe that we are in a linear time frame. And that's not true at all. Even science recently has proven otherwise. So we exist in circular time. There's a lot more to say about that, but I really recommend that movie for that reason, bringing out the concepts of circular time.
Thank you. I love those. And that Mark Nepo book, The Book of Awakening, is really interesting in the way that it's structured. And I found when I dip into that on a daily basis, definitely one that gets you thinking differently and opening up in different ways. Recommended that also. Great book you shared with me. Feels like about a year ago now, but not quite that long.
It's a year long.
It is, yeah, every single day. And somehow he seems to be apt. He's writing it in a very knowing way sometimes. We touched on it sort of at the start, these resets you've been through. And one of the things I'm curious about is what's helped people to navigate that. So if you think, and if you're willing to share about it, one of the biggest events, experience that caused you most to stop reset, what was it and what helped you through that?
Easy. And we touched on that already. It was my daughter's death. I had a 19-year-old daughter who fell 30 feet onto her head, sustained massive brain injuries. She was taken to the emergency room. They cut a hole in her skull to relieve the pressure from the blood that was bleeding into her brain. Put her on a ventilator. She was unconscious in ICU, and that's where she remained for 5 days. It took her 5 days to die before they declared her brain dead. And that was the most significant experience in my life. It was the most painful. It also turned out to be my greatest blessing. People sometimes look at me like I'm crazy for saying something like that, but it's true. And the reason is that despite all of the years that I did with grief counseling, none of that helped me. I was driven to my knees, and I was driven to a place that had no future. There was only right here, right now, and there's no place else I could be other than in my wide open heart in a very painful circumstance. Dropping into that place, I never left her side for the whole 5 days. And so this was an extended satori, is what I call it. Satori is a Japanese word that means an enlightenment, informs the rest of your life. So I went to a higher place, a different place, a place of awareness and consciousness that I had always thought I understood, but understanding is not knowing, comes through the experience. And it touched me very deeply, to say the least. It changed my whole life, put me in touch directly with my higher self, my oversoul, my almakua, whatever you want to call it. And it taught me the reality of dropping into the heart and operating from that place. And in the feelings of the heart, even in the painful circumstances, healing and meaning are found.
Firstly, thank you for sharing the way you do. I'm still aware that I think I wouldn't be at that place you managed to get to with it. And it's hard. It's not an easy process, I don't think, that Miqui process you've been through. And I appreciate you dropped into that state, but what helped you get there and work through it? For people that may not have had the experiences you've had up to that point, what helps them or helps you to navigate?
So I think that most people in their life, in this culture, in this collective consciousness bubble that we live in, are never taught how to be inner referenced. They're taught to be outer referenced. And they're taught limitations, restrictions, and fears. And I think through the course of my life in the military, I learned that I could physically do way more than I ever thought I could. I just had these limitations of thinking. And I also learned how to overcome the fears. A lot of the things that we do are based on fears that are actually from past experiences and projections into the future, never into the present. Being present is a primary thing. And you only get to the present by being still and dropping into your heart. And then I also learned that through all of my life's experiences, that all things are possible. It just takes moving into the current that makes what's possible probable. And the analogy I have for that is if you're on the river, and if you're in a boat or in a canoe on the river, you can look into the river and you can see the current in the river that's taking you in a certain direction. But if you look off to the sides, you can also see that there are other currents in the river. And if you were to be in one of those currents, there's a possibility of going to a different direction. You can make that possibility a probability by moving into that current. And that's a direct choice. You have the ability to make that choice. And I say, rather than looking to the future, surrendering to what's present, stepping into the trajectory of what you want to manifest, and just be there. Bring your future through your past into your present, which is going back to circular time in the movie Arrival. And all you have to do, if you can stay in that place, is to step through the door when it opens for you. And the universe will open doors for you if you're in your heart. So follow the filament of your higher self and source from that as your highest truth.
It's definitely something I've glimpsed. I wouldn't say I live it day to day. There's definitely moments where things come together. Even at our meeting originally, one of those chance conversations, somebody called Mariella going, "You should talk to this guy, Terry." And the next thing we are doing this recording now, a year later, as they say. So it's funny how that works out sometimes. I think more and more we're seeing that happen in the world with these connections that can happen. And as you say, dropping onto the inner away from the external media marketing that often surrounds our lives. Some of the people listening to this are looking to shift what's possible for their lives, whether it's dealing with some hard things, where they've got great things going on and seeing what else might be possible. Are there any other suggestions that you bring from your experience that you'd have them look at to help them shift?
Yeah. And this is the most important thing I have to say. And this is a mission that I'm on, is to get people to make this kind of distinction. And it's to learn how to discern between types of feelings. We are taught in this culture that emotions and feelings are the same. They're not. Emotions and feelings are two completely different things. And not only that, there are different types of feelings. So a feeling that is a physiological reaction to an emotion that arises from a thought that assigns a value is one type of feeling. And I said that quickly. Let me break it down just a little bit. If an event happens in your world, subconsciously or consciously, you make a judgment about that event and you give it a value assignment, positive, negative, or neutral. Out of the value that you assign to that, that's a thought that you have about that event, usually based on your past experiences. From that thought comes what's called an emotion. The emotion is not a feeling. It's just something that arises out of a thought. Therefore, it's completely a mental process. Your body has a physiological reaction to that emotion, which comes from the thought that assigned the value, and that gives you one type of feeling. But there's another type of feeling that most people don't even realize, and that's the feeling that comes directly from the heart. I keep mentioning the heart. I think that's the most important thing to focus on. And you can, if you pay attention whenever a feeling comes up, if you pay attention to whether or not it's constricting or it has a soft quality to it. It can be soft even if it's painful. So if it's constricting, that's your indication it's coming from your mind, which is usually based in fear. If it has a soft quality, that means it's coming from the heart, which is where you're going to find your true self. So learn to develop the skill of discernment between the types of feelings, whether it's constricting or soft, and go with the soft. Be your soft self. From that place of recognizing the feeling in the heart, going to that place of softness. From there, you can manifest whatever you want. You can manifest the hologram of meaning and purpose through coherence with your heart, which then opens the door to magical moments, synergies, synchronicities like we talked about.
Very clear. I know for some people that may be a lot, you know what I mean? And I like to keep things simple, Simon, simple ideas. I find that really helpful if we can make it really a simple takeaway they can have, like a sentence. If you had to like synthesize down this message, what's the sort of one takeaway, a week from now, a month? Like I heard Terry and I remember him saying X. What's the takeaway you really want to be left with?
Basically, it's drop into your heart. Pay attention to the quality of the feeling and go with the one that comes from the heart and drop into it. That's where you'll find your true self.
Very clear, very simple as well. And if you're finding yourself going, I don't know what that feeling is, well, now's a good time to start listening and being open, because there's definitely that separation, that different sensation between sort of a warm, open sensation and a cold, sharp, contricty sensation. And I love that distinction. You help me review and see that a lot over our conversations, Terry. One of the things we haven't touched on yet is your work with sort of other disciplines and the sort of the idea of the wheel. Something you could touch on there?
Sure. So there are many different approaches to coming to that place, which I call the true self in the heart. Indigenous cultures tend to offer a lot of very rich ways of getting there. There's the Inca medicine wheel, which is called the Chicana. And that, to me, is depth psychology at an experiential level. And it takes you through practically all of the things that you need to do to reset yourself. And I find that it touches you in an energetic way that is completely heart-based, and it also takes you at the end into circular time. So I find that to be a magnificent model. I also have a great deal of respect and caring for the Hawaiian spirituality at the base of what it's all about.
Do you think there's a shared connection between sort of all these different mindsets that have been applied over time? Do you think there's some sort of shared synergy between them all?
I absolutely do. Yes. And I think that example of that in our Western way of thinking, there's a lot of I. In indigenous cultures, there is no I. There's no noun. It's all verb. It's all about we and coming into that collective space where we can come together. And once again, it's the heart connection.
I love it. And I know you fairly well. There's one quote that I'd rather have you share than me try and share. And that's the one from Columbine. You know what I'm referencing?
Oh, yeah. Should I briefly tell the story?
If you be so kind. Yes, please.
Okay. So in Columbine High School, and for those who don't know what Columbine is, it's a high school where one of the first mass shootings took place. And there were two students who brought guns to the school, and they ended up killing 12 students and a teacher. Behind that high school is a memorial, and the memorial is down in a hollow. And if you go down into this memorial, you have to walk through a park to get there. You hear noises and people talking, children playing. You get down into the hollow and it's dead silent. In this memorial, there's an inner circle of granite slabs that are placed about waist level, tilted maybe 45 degrees, so that you can read them easily. And they were placed there by the families of the students and the teacher that were killed. On the outside of that is a wall. And it's a brick wall. It's kind of like Anasazi architecture. And in that wall were placed plaques by people who were not family members. And it was there for the purpose of giving them a means of expression for their experience of this event. And I went around, you start at one end of that, and it talks about what a horrible tragedy this is. And then as you work your way around, the tone begins to change. And I came across this one plaque that made me stop dead in my tracks, and I took a picture of it, and I share it all the time. And it was by a 17-year-old boy who was one of the students. Around him, he saw his fellow classmates die. He saw the teacher die. And on this plaque, what he wanted to say about this whole event was, people talk about tragedies in their life that are defining, but I didn't let this define me. So in other words, he wasn't out of reference, he was in a reference, and he was in touch with who he was. And as tragic as the whole thing was, he wasn't letting that define him.
Thank you for giving the background story. And this aspect of this does not define me, I think, is really powerful. And it's easy for us to get caught up in our past, as you touched on. And sometimes when others have been through this, they can give us a bit of a light, bit of an inspiration to do that. I know from my conversation with you, Terry, and some people I've referred to you, the impact they've had from working with you and talking with you has been quite profound. And I really thank you for being with us today and sharing this journey, or a glimpse of your journey with us. So firstly, thank you for sharing what you have today. It's really valuable, loving it. And I'm curious if there are people that you wish you could listen into them answering these questions, people you think would be good guests for the show.
Yes. I've already mentioned Mike Singer and Mark Nepo. I think those are wonderful people to listen to. And I would also listen to Bruce Lipton.
Well, we'll get them on the list. I remember all those three people definitely have made a huge impact. And I'm also clear that many people haven't come across their work yet. And I'm hoping over the next couple of days, weeks, months, and years, we share more and more of these great wisdoms, great ideas, and help bring something about that I think will be quite profound. People listening, Terry, they're going to want to learn more about you and what you do. And I also know you're quite a private person. What's the best way for them to learn more about you and connect with you?
Not the complete way, but the best way would be to go to my website, which is www.hokseda, that's HOKSEDA.com. And that gives an overview, and it gives my contact information. And for anybody who wants to connect more directly, then they can either email me or call me. I'm open to both.
Perfect. And it's quite a unique word, this Hokseda word, HOKSEDA. Come on, I'm not going to let you off the hook, you mischievous monkey. What is Hokseda?
Hokseda is a Seneca Indian word that basically means that which is within, without, around, and through. In other words, it's whole being integration, and that's the whole focus of my practice, is whole being integration.
Thank you, Terry. I enjoyed talking to you, always do. Hope we get some more recordings, more conversations in the future, and at some point get you over to the UK when you can travel. I also want to acknowledge the person that for me is in the conversation, in the room, but isn't here, and that's your partner, Rose. I know she's a big part of your life, and thank her for sharing you with us today, if that makes sense, Terry.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Well, this has been a great reminder of some of these points, these conversation points. Terry, thank you for being with us today for this Pause, Stop, Reset episode. These reminders that we can drop back into our heart, that we can get inner referenced, that the past does not need to define us, and that there are people like you that have had these amazing lives that are willing to listen and share. For me, that aspect of going, who could I talk to, open things up, and recommend you do reach out to people and find some resources that can help you. We'll actually be putting more of those up at the website pause.reset.com, and you'll find resources there, links to Terry's website and things like that to help you on your journey on the path. With that said, it is time for us to once again pause.reset. Before you go, do make sure you're subscribed at Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars and a comment on what you heard from Terry and take some action on today. And I'll see you next time. And Terry, thanks for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure.
You've just heard a great podcast. Want to start your own? Email Jason at apodcastcompany.com.